We're just being recorded. Okay. So, Dorothy, my understanding was that we would have a little, back and forth conversation and see if people have questions or something they wanted to discuss about, how I got here,
Yeah.
sort of.
So
But
maybe I can preface the beginning with to say that, while Eleanor and I were planning for the exhibition, we felt that it would be useful for people to have an overview of the other kind of art that you do, because there were seasons where you did different types of calligraphic art. And I think that it would be very interesting to see the progression and also what has been happening with you lately. I know that you and Leander have this very exciting project that you've been making things. So, one of the things, Eleanor, that I really appreciate about you is that you have always been so productive. You just keep producing, and there is still so much passion after so many years, and I think that it's really very inspirational. I just wish that a lot of people could understand and see the development of your work. And also, of course, we can have, this is going to be very free and easy, and we can, people can ask you questions as you are showing us your work. So feel free to chime in, everyone, and, comment or ask, questions. Yeah. So Eleanor, with that, I give over the time to you.
okay. Okay, that sounds good. That sounds like a plan. So, I'm laughing because when Dorothy and I talked about this a week or so ago, I said to Dorothy, "What happens if nobody wants to know anything and no one has any questions?" And this idea of sitting there and saying, "Well, who wants to know anything?" But in fact, what we decided was if things go slowly, I can do a little show and tell about my personal art history. But in fact, what I'm going to do is start with that, because I think I put together a little series of pictures to show you, or photos of my work that I've kind of accumulated over the years. And I thought it might be interesting. Dorothy used the word seasons. She said there have been just different seasons in my life, and actually there have been, I think of it more as kind of ongoing projects that I really spent years working on and ended up with a body of work. And the biggest one, in fact, is the a la memoir series, the calligraphic paintings for the Paris Auschwitz memorial, and that's ongoing. So that kind of umbrellas a lot of what I'm going to be showing you, but I'm not going to be talking about that because I have already done that in more than one online lecture, and you will have the opportunity to see that series or part of that series of paintings. There are actually more and more and more, and we'll see what happens in a couple of years if I'm ready to reveal new works. But what I thought I could do was go back to the 90s, the 1990s, when I started work on the first really long-term calligraphy project, having spent, let's see, when did I start? I probably started calligraphy 20 years before that, and spent a lot of time doing commercial work. So commercial work, as many of you, I know a lot of you out there are do similar things. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, corporate events, diplomas, place cards, and that became my work for a very long time. In fact, it still is a little bit. I've backed off somewhat from doing that kind of work, but it didn't allow much time for doing anything really creative. It's not creative work, writing envelopes. Writing envelopes is about it's about the most boring way we can use our calligraphy. Those of you who've never done envelopes might think it would be fun. It would be for maybe 5 envelopes, but not for 500, for example. So at a certain point, I started living half the year in Europe. And when I married Leander, who's here in our audience somewhere. And we started to divide our time between New York City and the Netherlands, where he is from. And at that point, I started getting serious about doing artwork all the time, as opposed to occasionally making a piece of art when I had a little free time, because I found that I had a lot more, I wasn't freelancing, so I had a lot more free time, 6 months at a time. And what I started with was something that I call calligraphy quilts. And I'm going to show you a few of them, and I'll tell you just a bit about, how they evolved. And I will say that I worked on these in various series in terms of design and content and size and shape for probably close to 20 years, from the early 90s till I started the a la memoire work. I was doing calligraphy quilts. And what they are, they're collages made of cut up bits of my own calligraphy, mostly, although not always, but mostly combined with beautiful paper. So the beautiful paper would be marbled paper, would be printed Japanese paper, would be various paste papers, handmade papers, and beautiful machine-made papers that I started to collect. And as I continued this project for many, many years, I assembled a huge amount of beautiful paper. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a few of the quilts, and I'll just talk a little bit about them. And of course, I'll answer questions as we go along. So, whoops. Okay, here we go. Let's just do full screen. Okay, so this is one of the early pieces, and it looks pretty big on the screen. It's actually pretty small. It was probably, I don't have sizes on these, so I'm going to estimate it was about 6 inches, maybe by 4 inches. And most of the calligraphy that you see came from rejects. Remember I was talking about rejects, about the a la memoire pieces that I don't like. So these were pieces of calligraphy that perhaps I had started something and given up, or in some cases, I don't see any here, but sometimes they were printed pieces of calligraphy where I made something and printed multiples. And this is a log cabin quilt. For those of you who are quilt makers out there, this is a very, very traditional design called a log cabin, and it's made of strips. And you can see some, this is a Japanese paper here, this is a marbled paper, and some other kinds of paper that I collected. And this was early. This is one of the early ones. The very first ones were less carefully made, and so I'm not showing those. The first pieces I did were quite large, and I actually chopped up bits of calligraphy with a paper cutter and glued them down as little squares. And then at a certain point, I got a little more serious. So here, this is actually a few years later. This is also a log cabin quilt. And at this point, I had already, I'm skipping, probably 75 quilts between the first one and this one. But I had, at this point, I was making some calligraphy for cutting up. So the first few pieces I made, I already had some, folders or portfolios of rejected pieces I didn't like that I cut up. Here, I did things like, you can see here, I wrote an alphabet, and I wrote it in a blue paint on a blue paper. Similarly here, you can actually see the sequence KLMN. This is part of the same strip, A, B, C, D, E. There's T, U, V, W. I was going backwards there. And I use different styles of calligraphy. So there's some copperplate here, and some Gothic, and some metallic. And at this point, I decided that I wasn't going to stay with that square format. I wanted to break the edges of the piece. So I actually, if you look closely, you can see that the pieces that are extending are actually part of the same strip. So it looks as if I wove it. In fact, I cut it. I cut it here and then I attached it there. Same thing here. This dark blue one is actually part of this one. This WVUT, there's the S. This is all one strip. So I decided to make this look like a weaving, but a little bit random in terms of how many strips of paper I wove. I didn't do a full background all the way around. So this is one that I quite liked, and it also has some very beautiful bits of paper. These strips of paper are very small. These little thin ones are probably 3 millimeters wide, and the bigger ones are probably 5 or 6 millimeters. So I'm using very small bits of paper. As you'll see soon, they get even smaller. And here's another one from that little grouping that I was doing with the woven bits of calligraphy. Here, this A, B, C, D, E, F. There's the G over there, part of the G. There's part of the H. So I'm doing the same thing here, but at this point I tried some diagonals, and I also added these corners. And I will say that I had copied, or I think I copied on a piece of paper with a pencil, a very beautiful quilt I saw at a show somewhere, a real quilt, a cloth quilt that had these triangles in the corners. And it was actually in all 4 corners. You can see I put them here on the outside and here on the inside. And I used that beautiful quilt as my model for changing this log cabin. This would actually be considered one block of a log cabin because you have a center and then everything is building up around it. But then the addition of these triangular corners. And here I'm doing something. These are still all very small. You can see here's a date, 1997. Attic Window is the name of the pattern. And one of the things that I did over the years was collect pattern books for quilts, because they have, line drawings of patterns for cloth quilts, for bed quilts or hanging quilts, and I took them and made them very small. This is another one that looks quite big, and I think these little squares are probably maybe 3/8 of an inch. So that would be what a little bit more than a centimeter square. And I did an alphabet going through this, and I also cut up a line of writing, again in copper plate. So here I was also thinking about how I was balancing the yellow of this writing. This is a style of writing called Unschel, and the yellow inside this beautiful marbled paper, this lovely paper that I use on the corners and put around the edges of the piece. And then this piece has no I was going to say it has no Japanese paper. The outline strip here is a silver and gold on black Japanese paper. Everything else is marbled paper. Just 2 different pieces, the blue and the yellow and blue black. And another one based on a traditional pattern. The pattern is called, it says it right here, Ish River Rose, also from 1997. And I think if I'm correct, this is made of 9 quilt blocks. Each of these is the center of a quilt block. And I combined different metallic Japanese papers. This red paper has kind of sprinkles of silver and gold on it with this is the same one, that same lovely marbled paper. And on this one, I'm using copper plate everywhere. So it's all copper plate calligraphy. And I kind of like that bit of an E, so I put that in the center. So as I progressed, I got more and more careful about the precision and also finding bits. So the little Oh yeah, here's another style of calligraphy sneaking in. This is Carolingian, sneaking in a little bit here and there. Also, what I put in each little section, I didn't just randomly cut up bits of paper, or I may have cut it randomly, but then I chose it so that, you know, the directions would um, offset each other. I have some upside down, some sideways. I wanted the center to be upright. And I did a series of triptychs. So they were three parts, mostly with two patterns. So this is one pattern and this is a different pattern over here. And I drew these, I drew all of them very, very mathematically with pencil and ruler. And then I cut them very precisely. This here I'm using some very small bits. These are tiny little bits of paper. Nothing overlaps. Everything it fits exactly, which was, you know, a little bit obsessive, I would say, but I you know, did it very, very carefully and very slowly. These little triangles were cut. I don't even remember how small this is, but it's a very small, the components are very small. This one, I'm going to say, I won't say it's not successful, but I will say that you don't see the calligraphy very much. Sometimes the calligraphy is more evident. And
Eleanor,
yes,
sorry, we have two questions.
yes.
One of them is why did you choose to do quilts? And the second one is how do you work out the patterns before you finalize them with glue?
Okay. Why I did do quilt is actually I always loved quilts. I always loved looking at them, and you know, I have one that I use on my bed, and I just love the combination of the geometric or mathematical precision and the colors and the patterns. They just appeal to me as a non quilt maker, just something beautiful to look at. So, and at some point, I don't even remember why I thought it might be fun to try making a little one, you know, to try doing not a bit size quilt, but something out of paper. And later on, I realized that people do make paper quilts. I did not invent that, but I hadn't really seen any, and I just thought, let me see what happens if I cut and paste and, you know, create my own. It took some time to figure out what kind of surface to do it on. I use an acid-free mat board underneath the pasted pieces so that nothing peels off or turns yellow. So it's a good, you know, quality mat board. And the first pieces I did, I didn't even know how to glue it. I just, you know, stuck them down and they started, they didn't stay put very well. So then I started to use bookbinders glue, which is very permanent and also also acid free. What was the second question?
How do you work out the patterns before you glue them?
You know, that's an ongoing process. The first patterns that I did, I I just did very simple. You know, I copied from a book. I copied the log cabins or sometimes a star pattern. I measured them and I did them on graph paper, you know, when they got more complicated. And I measure everything very carefully. For something like this I did, you can see 2005. I did this, you know, after making these for, you know, almost 10 years and probably 10 years. I think the first ones were 1995. I already understood what I could overlap, what I could combine. You know, there was a certain amount of you know, a learning curve where things didn't work in some cases, and then they came out better when I learned to do it better. Something like this green triangle, I added afterwards. This was not part of my original drawing, but it looked a little bit, I guess it was because this paper is a little bland and I wanted something brighter. So I added those triangles, which somehow gives it a three-dimensional effect, which was not intentional. It just happened like that. I hope that answers the question. So I use I use a sharp pencil and a ruler and I measure everything very carefully. And here is something also a little bit later where I said before when I was referring to one of the others, you can't see the calligraphy. I wanted to make one that you could actually read, and all you can read actually is the alphabet, but you can see it in sequence. FGHIJKLMNOPQRSTU. So I wanted the alphabet to fit into that piece, and also to be the border. And this is a backwards alphabet. You can see Z, Y, X, W, V, etc. This goes backwards. And I don't remember what happened here, but I did the calligraphy before I cut it. So I guess I just added that's an F. I don't know why I put a flourish after the F. I know why I put it after the Z, because it was the last letter. So this one, I find this one very interesting because it's I'm really going away from the symmetricality of the other pieces, and I wanted to see how one side could balance the other. So this took a long time to draw. When I did the pencil drawing, there was a lot of erasing and correcting and rethinking. So the last few quilts that I want to show you are from the most complex series that I did, and they are based on cathedral windows. This is one of the early ones. This is from Chartres in France. And in this case, I went to the church, to the cathedral, and I copied the format, basically the size of the small window panels compared to the big ones, so the big ones were 2.5 of the small ones, and there was a curved, I guess it was probably a rose window or a small rose window at the top. And I tried to approximate the colors. So in Chartres, you have some fantastic blues, as some of you who have visited the cathedral probably recall that. And I think these blues that I used here are actually a little more luminescent than they look on the photo. So I tried to bring out that look. But later, I must have done 15 cathedral windows. And later I got a little more specific about the actual design of the window. So these were 2 windows in Strasbourg that I did a couple of years after that. And one of them, as you could see, had a predominantly yellow glass border and the other predominantly red. And they had figures. These, I believe, were scenes from the Bible, or in some cases there would be individual saints. This one might have been a saint. I actually don't remember, but I tried to get the effect of the light coming through the windows. And again, these are fairly small. They're not as small as the first ones, but the little bits that I cut in these little squares that I used to create the stained glass pattern look at these little triangles here, are tiny. So I was gluing them with a Q-tip with this bookbinder's glue, and I would use my fingernail to kind of stick it to my finger and just drop it in place. But one of the things about the bookbinder's glue is you can move it around once you place it. So if I put one of these little squares down over here and it was a little bit off, I could just move it slightly over and it would end up in the right place. So it's kind of forgiving as a glue, as opposed to using a glue stick or something where you end up with basically glue everywhere. It's a better product than a glue stick. And finally, this was a rose window. This was from Saint-Denis, the cathedral right outside Paris, or the basilica outside Paris, Saint-Denis, and this is one of the rose windows from there. And here I did a sequential alphabet for the squares inside one of the rings of the rose window, and another sequential alphabet here. You can see TU, WX, almost sequential, YZ, NOPQRST. And all of these I think actually when I got to this point, I sort of cheated. I put down the red as one piece and then the blue squares on top, rather than having these thin little strips of red, which I don't think I could have managed. So this is a big piece, and this took the better part of 2 months to complete. Some of the quilts I did in a day or 2 days. This was a very long process. So I'm going to move on to another chapter in my life. And what I'm going to say is that I stopped making the quilts at about the time that I started the a la memoir project. So I made the quilts till about 2010. And at that point, I shifted to the a la memoir. I had not planned to stop making quilts, but I found myself getting involved in these paintings, the calligraphic paintings of the deported children, and I couldn't do both. It didn't seem that I could do something as, decorative and pretty and in a way sort of frivolous as the quilts, and also make those a la memoir paintings. So that was my focus for quite a while until COVID. So 2020. So I went straight through 2010 to 2020 doing the Paris Auschwitz a la memoir. And then we got locked in, and I was in Brooklyn. I was in my studio in Brooklyn, and I just, everybody got, I shouldn't say everybody, I got really thrown by the whole shocking thing that happened to the world with COVID and basically not being able to leave my home. And I wasn't focusing on doing a la memoir paintings. And I started to make some alphabets just to do something. And that grew into another very large project. I took this picture at some point just to show someone, I think, a bunch of them on my desk, but I'm going to show you some individual ones. And these are all done with oil pastels, and are also fairly small. They're not as big as they look on my computer screen. So maybe 6 inches by 8 inches or something like that, or 6 by 9. And I worked with the alphabet, and I did the alphabet straight, and I did it backwards, and I did parts big and I did parts small, and I used different styles of calligraphy, and it kind of went on and on and on. And I realized at a certain point, I enjoyed it very much. I realized at a certain point that the oil pastel, someone asked me about this the other day, it was not drying very well. And I couldn't put anything on top of it because things would get stuck, or the paint would come off, the oil pastel would come off. Oil pastel is a very soft kind of, it's like a wonderful crayon. It's a greasy kind of pastel with bright, beautiful colors, as you can see. But you cover your hands in color, anything you touch, it smears onto. So I realized after making a bunch of them that ended up damaged because they got, I tried putting tracing paper over them, they got stuck, bits of the color would come off. I finally realized that I could make the background with oil pastel and then let that almost dry, and then I covered that with oil paint. So I call these oil pastel alphabets, but they're actually oil pastel ground and oil paint on top. So the underlayer was orange and red oil pastel, and then the top was this Prussian blue, and then I guess something like an ultramarine blue mixed with white oil paint. And I cut the letters out with a pen, meaning I wrote with a pen with nothing on the pen. So I would make a stroke and then have to wipe off the paint that the pen removes. Some of you have seen me do this. I've done some demonstration, and I can tell you more another time. And I did many of those. This was very small. This was a little one. I did a series of yellow ones, which were very bright. I did borders around most of them. This is with a gold oil pastel. And here I did one of the series I did had either a lot of A's and then the rest of the alphabet, or a lot of Z's and again the rest of the alphabet. And here's a backwards one. So the paint on top, where you see these swirls of paint, I actually did that with my fingers. After I put the background on, the background was this blue, and then I spread the paint. You can almost see where my fingers are doing this, but I like the swirls that I was able to get with by finger painting. And oil paint dries. If you leave it for a couple of days, it's hard, so nothing cracks off or smears off or peels off. Oops, I skipped one. So a fairly simple piece where I'm doing a backwards alphabet with 3 Z's and a Gothic ABC or Z, Y, X. This is another rather small piece, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches. And here's one. I did a series that were kind of mirror image pieces where I did an alphabet, A to Z, and I turned it upside down. I didn't write upside down. I just turned the piece of paper upside down and did another alphabet. And then I added these swirls over here at the top because I didn't plan this. I just started writing with my A. And by the time I finished, I realized I had a lot of empty space at the top and the bottom was a little crowded. So I wanted to balance this with some more swirls on the top. And this is one that I like. I like a lot of them, but I also, again, as is my way, I have plenty of rejects that I keep finding portfolios full of bad art that I put away. And here's the last of these that I'm going to show you, which is one where I actually used 2 pens. I used a big pen for the letters and a smaller pen for these swirls. They're done with a different nib. That's why you have these thinner, smaller lines for the decorations. And this is also, I guess at this point, this is still 2020, but at this point, I had done ABC and I had done ZYX. So here I alternated AZ, BY, CX, DW. I had to keep paying attention so that I got the right letters in the right order. So it's the alphabet alternating forward and backward. So I think that's all for the oil pastel alphabets. I'm just going to show you a couple of straightforward pieces of calligraphy that I did around the same time. And then I'm going to show you.
Eleanor,
Yes?
can I ask a question about this one? So
Yeah.
this one, there were many layers in the background. Is that right? I mean, many colors in the background or many layers of color. So when you scratched it, you could get this ombre effect.
Yes, exactly. I colored in with a bright yellow oil pastel. I guess I colored here and here and here, and then I took a red orange, and some of it mixed, some of it I blended together. I also blend them with my fingers too. You can't really do it with a brush. You have to push the color around. So, and then when I put the 2 colors on top, this blue and this is a dark blue. It's not black, but it's a blue-black kind of oil paint, and then started to write. It actually was a surprise what came through. I didn't plan that Y would have, these 3 colors. I'm not sure why I think this greenish color is the foreground, the blue blending a little bit with the yellow. I think it blended in a bit. You could see bits of blue here too.
Very nice.
Okay, other questions about these? Okay, so just a couple of straightforward pieces of calligraphy that I have, and then I'll show you the project that Langert and I have been working on. So this oil pastel series I did in 2020, 2021. I think that was it, but I did it every day. So I probably have 200 of these in boxes, in folders, some of which I like. And then I did a few, these are large pieces. The ones that I'm showing now, these were large pieces of calligraphy. I tried working on with colored backgrounds. What I thought I would do was use the kind of colored backgrounds that I used for the a la memoir paintings, not quite as complex, but I used yellow and orange acrylic, and then let them, that I did with a brush for the background, and then I wrote over it. And here, this is a poem that I love, and that one of my friends, who I think is not here, but some of you know Bob Cooperman, he recites this. He has memorized all 3 verses of this, and he asked me to do this for him at one point.
We have a question about the pastel series. Maria wants to ask, what material did you create them on?
The oil pastels?
Yes. What
Oh,
surface?
okay. It's on, they are on a heavy watercolor paper.
Okay. And Roxana is asking, did you prepare the surface for the colorful backgrounds one that you're showing us now? Do you prepare the surface so the ink will not bleed?
No, it depends on what you use as the surface, the background. So in the case of both of these pieces, I did the background with an acrylic paint, which I thinned out a little bit. But once acrylic dries, you can write over it. You don't have to do anything extra to the surface. If I did this with watercolor, it might bleed. And if I did it with gouache, it definitely would bleed. But acrylic or a non-water-based, a waterproof ink dries waterproof. So I think this one actually is a waterproof ink in the background. And then I wrote in a blue gouache on top of the waterproof ink. And here's something very structured that I actually did for somebody using a gothicized italic. This was with a cadmium red deep a gouache on a warm white paper, no decoration, no nothing. I just used a tiny little bit of decoration on my capitals and the top line. And finally, here's a bit of copperplate, since a lot of you expect me to do copperplate. I do a lot of copperplate, but I chose one piece from a series. I sometimes I'll do the same text many times over, and this is one that I did quite a few times. This one I did with a blue paint that's mostly mixed with white. So it's very, very little blue. There's a little blue showing here, a little blue at the bottom. The rest is, it's not a white paint, but there's a drop of blue in it on a dark blue background. I also did this piece on a black background with gold, and I did it with silver, and it's just such a beautiful poem, and it has a nice length, so I can change the flourish, I can change the layout and make a lot of work with the same text, and each piece is different. So that is my my screen sharing. And what I'm going to do, I know we still have a little time left. I'm going to show you what Leendert and I have been working on, because Dorothy mentioned that as a teaser for you. And we have started, I think last year, we started making miniature books, and miniature, really miniature. And what happened was, Leendert is a fine artist. He's a painter, many kinds of media. He works in many media. And last year, I guess, we were taking a walk somewhere, and I saw in an antique shop window some little tiny bound books, and something, you know, resonated with the beautiful little tiny books. I think they were open, but they were bound, you know, sewn binding books. And I said, wouldn't it be fun to do something like that? And maybe we could come up with a way to do it together. So the plan that we came up with was that Lander would paint, it would be his painting. He would do watercolor painting and I would do calligraphy. And the way that we've been working thus far, maybe this is it, but so far we're doing this, is I'm doing long strips. I'm doing accordion fold books. I'll show you that. I have them right here. I have a few of them. I'm going to set up here and show you. I'm going to show you this under my my other camera so you can look down at my desk. And to make an accordion fold book, you have to do something on a narrow strip of paper. So we stretched some watercolor paper. Someone was asking about that last time. And I divided it into sections so we could make many strips at the same time. And Lander painted a picture sort of, or a background on each section. And at the same time, I chose some text that could be divided into either 8 or 10 pages. Okay, so I'm going to show you this, and I will tell you that I have my document camera. I'm going to do my best with the light because we were trying to figure out the best way to do this. And there was I have to move things around a little bit so you can see it well. I'm going to turn off my lights here. Whoops. Wrong one. And I'm going to turn on my document camera. And you can see, let's see. I picked out a few of the little books. I picked out 6 to show you. And they are very small. They're, here's a ruler. This is 5.5 centimeters by 5.5 centimeters. Some of them are vertical. So they're also this is 6 centimeters by 9. This is the biggest one that I ever made. Some of them are even smaller. And as I said, Lander does the painting and I do the calligraphy, and I also do the binding. So I'm going to show you some of these. I'll just move them out of the way. I have this on a black background and we'll see how well we can get the light to work. So here's one, and it's bound in a Japanese paper with a nice red ribbon with gold trim, and you could see. Let's open this. And when I open it, it says, "The sea, once it casts its spell, holds one in its net of wonders forever," by Jacques Cousteau. And Lander painted the sea and the landscape, and I did the lettering. I apologize for it's not quite as sharp. I think you can see it pretty well here. Okay. So this is actually one of the ones with the biggest writing that I've done. You could see from my fingers that it's really quite small. Here is one with a beautiful satin ribbon. The paper, this is a Japanese paper, printed paper. And last week when Lisette was talking about making covers, it's a similar process to what she does to make these. These are little cardboard pieces that you cut out a square or whatever of cardboard, and then you cover it, and then in the end, after I've done the writing, I glue the little folded book to the cover. So, and here I particularly love this because of Lander's flowers here. So everyone suddenly burst out singing. Let me just move this so you can see it a little better. There. Okay. Prison birds must find in freedom, winging wildly across the white orchards and dark green fields. This was a poem by Siegfried Sassoon, who was a poet from the First World War, who died, I think, in the First World War. And I find his poetry is so elegant, and it goes so beautifully with Layner's painting. And the lettering is done with, for those of you who are interested, is done with a fine tech gold. So it actually sparkles. Were you to see it in person, you would see that it's shiny. The lettering is shiny. It's a dark gold. I think it's called Arabic gold. Here's a tiny one with a little green ribbon. So it's like opening a gift, right? What is inside? I never remember actually from each time I look at it. And here is a bit of Shelley, Ode to the West Wind. If I hold it still, you can probably see it better. Oh, wild west wind. So I asked Lander to paint an autumn landscape. Thou breath of autumn's being. And he has a field. And this, I bet you all know this line. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? We know this line? That's a nice, optimistic. Okay, with the field and the title, Ode to the West Wind. And just a couple more, if you are interested. Here's another Japanese paper, blue and gold. These papers are so beautiful because the patterning is very small, and you can cut it, just like with the quilts, you know, you could cut a small piece of it and still see the pattern. And here's a night scene. The sky is lit with a million stars. The best part of the glorious day is when it turns to night. So that has little stars. Again, like something I was telling you when I talked about the a la memoire, when I had little speckles on the page on the big a la memoire paintings, I did these the same way. I used a toothbrush and just splattered white paint after I did the writing. You have to do that carefully, especially when it's something so tiny, because you don't want to get big blobs of paint on it. They really need to be little speckles in order to look like the stars. Okay, just two more. This is one that has kind of a nice binding. I used 2 ribbons and I wove them twice. 1, 2. And then when I tie it with a double ribbon. And what's in here? Oh, this one is funny. If I were a bear and a big bear too, I wouldn't much care if it froze or snowed. This is from Winnie the Pooh. And I asked, again, Lander painted a snowscape for me. I think this is the only one we've made about 50 or 60 of them so far. I think this is the only one that's funny. All the others are serious bits of Dante or Keats or Shelley. Just that one. And finally, here's one more. And what is in it, I do not remember. We will see. Oh, here's yes, a copperplate one. The beauty and mystery of the ocean fills our lives with wonders vast beyond our imagination. This is a tiny painting, and I think it really, all the paintings are tiny, but I think it really shows a lovely seascape with the hills around it. And I think that is the show. So I'm going to go back to the regular camera. Put on the light, move that. And I'm going to ask if there's anything else I can tell you. Anything you would like to know or say? Or are you Exhausted?
How did you bind the tiny books?
How did I bind them? Glue. I make the covers, and they are just like, oh, I don't know if you saw Lisette's lecture, but there's a way, wait, obviously I should use this to show you. Hang on. Let's look at that. There's a way of covering paper where you put a piece of paper down and then you put your cardboard on top and you fold it. I think she showed us, you fold each side over. It's a very, very simple bookbinder technique, which I think if you haven't ever seen it, you could probably go to YouTube and put in accordion books or something like that, or ask somebody who's nearer than I am to demonstrate for you. It's quite easy. And the only thing is I had to plan ahead with the ribbon because I had to weave the ribbon. I just cut 2 holes here and I went under and over. This is a very simple, hardly a weave at all. And I had to do that before I glued the cover to the cardboard. And then after that, I had my folded book and I put glue on the back of this page and stuck it down to this. And then I closed it up and I put glue on the back of that page. And I did that and I made sure it was square and I checked to see that the edges were even. Sometimes you can kind of move it around a little bit to make it fit right. And then I put it under a weight to flatten it. It stays flat, but just to make sure everything is well stuck down. It's pretty easy once you do it. like everything in life, right? Once you do it a few dozen times. But I recall taking a bookbinding class a million years ago, and we learned to make accordion books, and they were big and they were a little rougher. But I learned about bookbinder's glue. I learned how to cut. You have to cut your own. I don't chop it. I cut it with a knife, actually with a razor. And measuring, cutting, and gluing are all underrated skills for, any kind of construction. I see another.
We have a question. Do you make the small books as sets of collections or as the inspiration comes?
As inspiration comes. What I do once in a while, I've done this maybe 10 times, is I'll just kind of page through books of poetry or books of quotes, like Bartlett's Familiar Quotations or the Oxford Book of Quotes. I'll just kind of flip through pages and I'll look for things that seem a nice length and good words. Or if I'm a little bit more organized, I'll look in the index under autumn or spring or the sea, and I'll get a whole list of quotes about that, and then I'll read through them and see what I like. And then I copy down some quotes, and when I have some that seem like something that I would make a nice book out of, then I go to my artist and I say, I need 2 autumn landscapes, 1 seascape, and 2 nights. And he says, right you are.
It's wonderful that you are collaborating, that you and Leanne together are making these beautiful books. Yeah, are there plans to make larger books? Nari is asking.
No, I think part of the pleasure and maybe for us the beauty of these is that they're miniature. I love the fact that they're tiny. And I mean, especially since the work that I'm doing, the Ellen memoir is quite big, and I'm still doing it. So in this case, unlike that kind of intermission during the pandemic when I did nothing but alphabets, I'm doing 2 things at once, which I don't usually do. So I'm doing some of the books and I'm doing some of the paintings slowly. I mean, it's not like I complete, 2 books a day and then 3 paintings. I mean, we're talking about over the course of weeks. I think in the last month, I've probably done 4 or 5 new books. And now I'm waiting for Langer to finish the next 5 paintings, and then I'll make a few more.
Do you consider selling them?
I would consider selling them, yes. I have yet to come up with anything logical in terms of price. So if I ever do, I will be happy to sell some of them. It's one of those situations that some of you are familiar with who make things, where the amount of time you put into it is enormous. There's the research to find the quotes, the layout I do all the layouts separately before I do anything on the paper. It's Lander doing the painting, it's stretching the paper, it's making the covers. It's days and days of work. And then the result is, this size. And, if the result is a mural on the wall of a office building, then you say, well, okay, that'll be $50,000. But the result is a 2.5-inch book. So I don't know. At some point, I'll probably sell a couple, or maybe we'll show them, or maybe we'll just make them. We enjoy it. So it's also kind of nice as it rests my mind a little bit when I'm working on this project about tragedy and war and death and assassination of children, and sometimes it's hard to do that. And this is very, you can put on some rock and roll and, dance around while you make the calligraphy.
Must be nice to have your own artist on tap.
Say that again? Oh, yes, you're right. It's nice to have an artist on tap. Right. Yeah, that's for sure. And Lander, you're very quiet. I know you're out there somewhere, but
Okay. Just
we're
Sunday
talking
today,
about
so I have to be quiet.
Oh, okay. Day of rest. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, other questions or comments? Anything else I can share with you? No?
Well, we have a lot of comments about the books being very beautiful. That it's a wonderful collaboration. Beautiful artworks created by a beautiful couple. Yeah, a lot of appreciation for the books. Oh, Eleanor, do you remember these postcards?
Yes, I do.
Do you
Yes.
still have them?
Yeah, I probably do. Yes. But I think I have them in New York.
Oh, okay.
They're behind you, in the top shelf.
No, that's not a postcard. You mean
No,
this?
the other, above you,
The other?
above you, the
Oh, we
postcard.
do. Oh, we have them here. Oh, okay.
Mm,
On the top shelf. I can't reach the top shelf. Oh yeah, here's another oil pastel. And I have
nice.
it's covered with plastic, so it takes the light. Yeah, I guess we do. The problem with those postcards that at a certain point, I guess it was in 20. Well, I don't remember, 2019 or something, when I was in Hong Kong. So I did start those before the pandemic. I started making some of those before. A printer in Hong Kong made a series of those postcards for me, and I do have a lot of them. The only problem, which I freely admit, is they weren't printed on a glossy paper. They were printed on a matte paper, and glossy paper would look better because of the quality of the paint. It really needs to be it needs to pop, and it's a little flat. They're a little flat. So at this point, if I'm happy to give them away. When I made them originally, the postcards, I thought I would sell postcards. As a freelancer, you're always thinking, what can I sell next? But I would, if I get to Singapore or Hong Kong or Japan next year, I'll be happy to give them to anyone who wants them. They are pretty. They're pretty, but they're not good enough for me.
Oh, these are the ones that in case you couldn't see, I was not spotlighted. These are the alphabet series, and that were made into postcard size. Yeah,
That's this. You have this one.
yeah, yeah.
I
That's
have, I have it on my desk here. Yeah, I think that was in 2019. Yeah, that was last time I was in Hong Kong. So thank you for showing those.
yeah. Okay, well, we have come
Janet,
to. Sorry?
Janet, you can remind me, telling Janet, remind me to bring them to England when I come and I'll
Okay.
give them to you.
Postcard that you did for the Alain Memoir original exhibition, that was matte, but that was lovely. That was quite a big, it was bigger than a postcard, but it was,
Oh, the announcement
yes,
for
the one that you put out a long time ago.
yeah. Yes. Yeah, there have been a couple of announcements that were printed better or worse, you know, depending on what the gallery or the museum was spending on
Yeah.
the printing. So, you know, if you don't think of glossy, then matte looks fine,
Mm.
right? So,
Yeah.
okay. Dorothy, shall we wrap this up?
Okay,
Please.
we can. Let's do that.
Okay, why don't you? Dorothy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening next week? Because there's one more session, which
Hmm.
is the closing, and Dorothy is going to be in charge of that.
Okay, well, it's going to be just usually for at the end of the exhibition, I will wrap up by sharing some reflections, and the reflections not just of me personally, but also feedback from the people who have come to attend, and you know how they felt, how it affected them, and also to kind of, you know, to share my perspective on why this exhibition and my thoughts about how art serves our memory. So it will be, and also I think I will speak a little bit about the art of letters and what is our mission, and the symbiosis, the mentorship program that's going on. So yeah, it's going to be a very chill, relaxed, and casual session.
Okay.
So that will be next Sunday. And then after that, the exhibition will remain online for a while, so that, you know, you can continue to enjoy the works and come back to review them, look at them. Yeah. So I think I can stop the recording now. Yes.